5, 3. 1, 6, 1, 3, 5, 3.
Milk.
One is 3, 6, 1, 3, 0, 3, 5, 3. Let's go. $500. Can I get a ticket?
I'm not going to eat what I want.
Give me a ticket. One ticket.
Any more toys?
$299 529 $299 529.
Oh wow! Amazing.
Cross out. This is a mini autumn cross. How do I know it's a mini autumn cross? The size of the flower, the color of the flower.
The color and the size.
Yes. And this is our old plant.
Yes, yes, you can see.
Very old plant.
You can see.
That we need to really look at it, like take off the dead thing,
Really?
right? And
And cut off some of the root.
yes, you could.
Yeah.
Yes, you could. What I would do is I'll give it a good soak.
I had it soaking today.
Right, give it a good soak and see what is good and what is not so good. But the flowers are, again, probably a little bit deficient in nutrition because they usually have a lot more flowers. Right.
Under the bush.
Okay. That tell you it's a buckle. Oops. Okay. So it's well grown. It's growing in a mixture of sphagnum and something else.
You say don't use sphagnum.
Clone Charmy CL210. So this is one of those mass-produced people who don't want their formula to be known.
No, okay.
Okay, so tell me what's the fault with this plant, with this bloom? This
dry.
presentation, no?
Oh.
The presentation.
Flowers are going on.
Take it right.
It was not staked early, right? So it needed to be staked when it got to about family. Again, yes, this look like a Jenny Lynn too.
That's the one you need a name for?
Okay. It looked like, oh, what's his name?
Miltonia.
No. No, it's no. This
I know, but they
the name is okay. Post it and I'll look it up. Dendrobium. No, Nopon Green Star Times. I cannot pronounce the next one. Gold. Chai Siri Gold.
That's yours?
Right. I mean, nice growth. Okay.
Like what?
Yeah, a mixture. Tree for. It's in soil. It's a mixture of soil, but I think it's a little too heavy for it.
Mix up the soil.
Okay. Yeah. And I can tell, Jenny Lynn,
Big.
your plant. I can tell Jenny Lynn's plant. Can you see it? Okay. Beautifully flowered. Arrangement not so good. There are two inflorescences.
Right. Yeah.
Right. nicely flowers. It's a small plant. And who brought this in? Beautiful, beautiful. It's a small plant, but the bloom is really, really nice. A little small, but beautiful. Well, nicely displayed. Can't complain. Great. Let's move them up to the front.
To get them set.
You mean the granules is different, the sauce? Yes. Alright, so a lot of the foliar spray, the ones recommended for foliar sprays, they are hygroscopic, meaning that they absorb water from the air. First, the best thing to do is pour those fertilizers into a sealed container. I personally use the fabric softener bottles because it has that little lip that goes down and then it's tightened. So once I buy them, that's one of the reasons why I only have the empty ones here. It's not just because I don't want to give them a fertilizer. Every time I buy the fertilizers, I pour them out into a container.
Really? Oh, it's
When-
keeping them in the plastic.
Yeah, so when it gets liquefied now, the problem that you're going to have is that you're going to have to gauge it. Because there's no way to tell how much water it had absorbed. So in that case, less is more. It is better you go less than you accidentally overfeed. Yes, those work too.
Oh, coffee jars.
Yes.
Glass jar and plastic tops.
Yeah.
Question. There's a sunburn there.
There's a person here.
Yeah, there's a sunburn on the tiny part. And it is so healthy, looking good. But between the leaves, it pushes all down. The spike, but like they are retarded, like in that going down.
They have a phosphate issue.
It's realized, I realized. There's sunburn, I said that this is.
Any other questions?
Says that they took for the another got second at the floor show. The one that got second.
Any other questions?
No?
Alright, thanks much, Francine. We are going to move on to
Stems as well. Because most of our stems need to be green. And then the foods need to move up and down the stems along the leaves and that sort of thing. So we have to ensure that we have a very good nitrogen balance when we are feeding. When you look at your fertilizer, they're legally supposed to tell you exactly what's in there, the percentage and the ratio that's in there. The other thing is the deficiency symptoms. So the fact that the nitrogen is necessary for restoring your green leaves, ensuring that you have good healthy roots and stems. If you don't have enough nitrogen, then you're going to end up with nitrogen deficiency symptoms. The clearest nitrogen deficiency symptom is when the leaves start to turn yellow. But for you to differentiate between a different type of yellowing and a different type of issue is that the older leaves are the ones that start turning yellow when you have a nitrogen deficiency. The thing with nitrogen is that it is one of the movable nutrients. So what will happen is that if the plant has less nitrogen, it will move the nitrogen from the older leaves to the younger leaves to try to get longevity. The plant just wants to stay alive long enough until good times come again. So what the plant will do is move the nitrogen from the older leaves to the younger leaves, and then you'll see your older leaves start getting yellow. And the yellowing will start from the tip up towards the stem. Because what happens is that the plant is sucking the nitrogen out and it leaves the end yellow. So it starts yellowing gradually inwards as it starts to happen. Now if you up your nitrogen intake or application to the plant, it will disappear relatively quickly. So that's something that we can look out for. Stunted growth is the other one. If it is that the plant does not have enough nitrogen to maintain the old leaves, grow new leaves, then the plant will look stunted. And we can all tell when something looks stunted. So that's something that you can look out for. The leaves also end up with a dull color, a dull finish, or you have weak stems. So sometimes you can look at the plants, the orchids, and you can tell that the stem isn't as robust as it ought to be. Sometimes you can see that the leaves seem like they're almost retracting off of the plant because the stems are weak. Or if you see it leaning over for no reason, there's no spike on it with flowers to cause it to be leaning, yet the stem is leaning. Why? It's usually because you have a low nitrogen deficiency. Nitrogen toxicity. Always say not everything is good is to be had in excess. If you have excess nitrogen in your feed, what tends to happen is that the plant will get excessively green and never blooms. So what will happen is that the plant will focus on growing a whole bunch of leaves, but then will never bloom because you don't have enough of the other nutrients to spur the plant and support any type of bloom. And the plant will always do what it can with what it is receiving.
Right.
So that's something that we definitely need to take into consideration. Next is phosphorus, P, the P in the NPK. Now phosphorus is one of the most essential nutrients that is marketed for root development. The reason it is marketed that way for high phosphate or phosphorus-based fertilizers is that phosphorus helps with the root tip development, for elongation, for cell wall building, cell division, and for helping the roots to grow so that they can start searching for the food. Now, I'm not sure if anybody noticed, but sometimes you see your plant has been going well and the roots were fusing onto the side of the container, fusing to the bark, fusing to the charcoal, and then something happened, the plant start look poorly, and then the roots start letting go of all of these areas. This is one of the first signs of a phosphate imbalance. It's not quite deficient yet, but it's a phosphate imbalance. So why that happens is simply because the cell walls are breaking down, so the plant is retracting. The plant is not feeling robust. If you're not feeling so good, you don't want to go out on the road. You don't want to go out with all your glory. So that's one of the things that we have to look at. Phosphorus is also essential for flowering. Most persons are not aware of that because most of the fertilizers are not marketed that way. They say nitrogen for leaves, phosphorus for roots, and potassium for flowers. But phosphorus is essential for flowers at the starting point. So if it is that you don't have enough phosphorus at the beginning before it starts to flower, the plant is going to think or consider, decide that, okay, I don't have enough phosphorus, so I won't be able to support too many flowers. So the spike, the genetic material that is being sent to the spike for the amount of flowers that the plant is going to bloom with is going to be less. And if you miss that window, even if you dose the plant in phosphorus at the end, the genetic material has already been sent. I can only afford to grow 3 flowers on this spike. At this moment, the amount of nutrients I have right now, I can only grow 3 buds.
Yeah.
So even if you realize later and start dosing the plant,
It has already been ready.
you get
Done.
the signal already. So that's one of the things that we have to be mindful of. Persons always say, okay, once the plants start blooming, that's when you start feeding the high phosphate and the high potassium.
No.
You have to be looking and watching for when the plant is
I'm
about
guilty.
to. So when you see the little spike coming up, that's when you make the slight adjustment in the feed. That's something that you test, yes, what they market as bloom booster. But the reason they market it as bloom booster is because it has a higher ratio of phosphate and a higher ratio of potassium. Sometimes they might say it is, but the ratio only slightly
Different.
So you have to look on the packages because it will be a little bit more, but it needs to be significant more to give the plant the push. Because the plant is taking signals from the nutrients it is receiving. So if it is receiving more nitrogen, the signal the plant is getting is grow more leaves. So for it to stop growing leaves, or at least stop considering growing leaves and going into flower, it needs to get a big signal. The light that shines upon it from the phosphate needs to be brighter and get the attention of the plant to say, okay, hold on, I'm getting way more phosphorus now, so let me consider blooming. So that's what we have to do.
Okay, got you.
Energy transfer. Now we talk about nitrogen and making the chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll absorb the sunlight, and then the sunlight makes the chlorophyll, and then we make sugars, glucose sugars, and move it to the plants. Now phosphates create what is called adenosine triphosphate. Yeah. So what happens is that is what you call the fuel of the cells. This is an enzyme that moves everything from one place to the next. So when the plant absorbs all of that sunlight, it is energy. That energy needs to go into the plant, into the cells, to make the glucose. But if you can't move the energy out of the leaf to where it needs to go, then the plant just right there. So phosphorus is the energy transfer stimulant to move the sunlight to make the glucose, and when the glucose is made, to move all of those foods to the different areas of the plants that need it. So that's one of the reasons why it is very important, and including the storage. For some of us, the pseudobulbs and our orchids, all of the foods that are made in the leaves need to travel to the pseudobulb. If it can't move to the pseudobulb, the plant won't have it for when the times are rough. Or also, most of them, when the pseudobulbs are that fat, then they start to divide and get bigger, get more daughter plants and that sort of stuff. So if it is that you don't have enough storage, if you cannot feed yourself, why would you reproduce?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we have to do is ensure that our plants have enough so that they can store food for the times when, unbeknownst to us, in our environment something has changed. You forget to feed them for a couple of days. Some of us do travel overseas. The plant will need to have all of that reservoir and reserve to draw on. Yes. Knots? It looks like a knot, like a swollen knot. You're having an issue where have you ever heard they talk about swollen blood vessels because there's a clot? It's salt buildup in the roots are causing blockage, and then the foods and the water that is supposed to be able to move the way. So one of the things that you can consider doing is flushing your orchids.
Flush it. You flush it.
Alright.
Pure water. Just pure water.
Oh, okay. Alright, so the strengthening of the plant structure is another role of phosphorus. Phosphorus is very important for the strength of your cell walls. So if your individual cell walls are not strong enough, then your plant is going to look, colloquially we call it fenke. Because it's going to look almost it's going to look almost, yes, the structure. So because you have a low phosphorus intake, the plant will start to dull green because the leaves look shriveled up like the plant get maga. Yes. So that's something that you can use to identify that. The other part is now the deficiency symptoms. So we'll also end up with poor root development because of that. I was talking about when the roots start getting away from the pots and the areas because it's not so vigorous, so the plants start releasing everything, and that is also a symptom. Sometimes, depending on the variety, you will see the leaves start turning this purplish, dark purplish color. That is a sign of phosphorus deficiency. Reduced flowering. I spoke about the fact that if you don't have enough phosphorus, then you might have an issue. Well, most times what you'll have is considerably less flowers on the spike. I've heard Audrey mention it before, that is sometimes persons bring the exact same plant, and one plant, the inflorescence is just abundant, and another plant of the exact same variety just have 1 and 2 flowers. Part of that could potentially be a phosphate deficiency. The toxicity of phosphorus is that it causes a nutrient imbalance of the micronutrients, zinc, iron, and copper. And the micronutrients are actually very relevant, and we'll talk about that in one of our later sessions. But the simple fact is, the phosphate does not just cause issues when it is not there for what it is meant to do. The fact that it is not present also causes that, okay, if I am not in the room as the VIP, I can't let in my friend because them can't come in. I have to be in the room so that my friends can come in, and that causes another set of chain reactions because the micronutrients also have a set of deficiencies for themselves. The last one we're going to deal with this evening is the K in NPK, potassium. Potassium is necessary for photosynthesis and a lot of processes in growing our orchids because the primary function of potassium is for osmoregulation, moving water from one place to the next. So one of the reasons that the fertilizers are marketed to say phosphorus is for potassium, is for bloom, is the simple fact that it supports it. It both phosphorus and potassium is for blooms. It's not just one. Potassium moves water from one place to the next. So potassium helps the plant take up the water in the roots and then send it all the way out to the blooms. Just like when you would cut off the stalk and put it into a glass of water in a vase, potassium has that role, has that job to move the water. So what happens is that if you don't have enough potassium, your blooms look duller, your blooms are much smaller, they don't last long. So they are still connected to the plant, they're connected to the roots, but they're still dying. One of the reasons for that is that you don't have enough potassium to support moving the water from one place to the next. So we have to be very careful of that. It also means that if you have a high potassium content in your media or the plants have enough potassium to work with, if it is that you want your plants to be able to last longer for the show, say it started blooming before the show and you want it to last longer, giving ample amount of potassium will help the bloom stay on longer. Now it's not indefinitely, it's not infinite, but if it is that we mix it correctly and we apply correctly, then you increase longevity of the blooms and you can end up with multiple spikes, you can end up with it blooming multiple times a year. Now there are some orchids that based on external factors like the position of the sun and the long day, short night, you can't do anything about that unless you introduce lighting. But outside of those varieties, the ones that do bloom multiple times per year, if it is that you have a good potassium regimen, then you can end up with more blooms, lasting longer, more times per year. The next part of it is enhancing the disease resistance. Now, orchids are susceptible to fungus, bacteria, and all kind of stuff. Water, I've seen some waterlog and that sort of thing. Potassium is very essential for disease resistance. It helps with the cell wall development and protection of the plant, so it helps to resist the pathogens from entering the plant in the first place. And if they do enter the plant, then it assists in pushing those, yes, fighting all of the fungus and bacteria, especially. The other thing is that a lot of persons will only notice that their plant has a disease when it starts to bloom. That is one of the reasons why you would have to have a high volume of potassium in your feed closer to or during the time that the plant is blooming, because the flowers, they are more delicate. Insects tend to be attracted to them, and a lot of these insects are carriers, and they are biting and sucking insects. So when they bite, for example, yes, the thrips and the aphids and the mites too, when they bite, they carry some of the other bacteria and fungi and viruses. So they're not just, it's not just that they're sucking down the plants and they're causing issues of biting, they're also carrying diseases as well. So if it is that you don't have a good balance of potassium in your feed, then you'll run into some issues like that. No, it is not a fix-all, because if it is that the plant is infected, we may have to get a fungicide or a bactericide. But before, so that the plant can at least stay up long enough for you to notice and do something about it, the plant needs to already be healthy. Alright, so deficiency symptoms, it is yellowing and browning of the leaf edges. So if you've ever seen where the edges start to turn yellow and then they start to get brown and then it kind of start breaking off, that's because the plant does not have enough water, the water regulation. So the plant is going to start drying out from the leaf edge towards the middle, because the middle is, in this case, what is most important. Because if by understanding, going through what you remember, orchids have unique nutritional needs. What do you remember about that? Compared to other plants, what is so different about orchids when it comes to nutrition?
Acidity?
Yeah, pH. It would be pH related. Anything else? Alright, so orchids are epiphytes, meaning that they don't feed directly from the soil, they feed from the air. So the nutrients that are dissolved in water in the air that is floating around is what the orchids mainly feed from. So that gives some amount of restriction for the orchids to be able to get access to adequate amount of nutrients, because most of the essential nutrients for plants are not airborne naturally. They need to be dissolved in water. So because of that restriction, we have to take special care in knowing that that is how they feed, and because we want to take them home and take them out of their natural environment for us to look at them and take, part of their beauty, we have to then provide the best environment for them to grow in. So taking that they're epiphytic into consideration is the first one. Because they are epiphytic as well, they feed in small quantities. So it's not a case where they're in the soil, there's a rich nutrient reservoir that they can pull from. So what you would have to do, as we all know, is ensure that we feed in dilute amounts. The roots, they're exposed. So you have to ensure that the feed that you're using is dilute enough, because then you don't want to burn your roots. The other part is that they are sensitive to salt buildup. So when other plants would be able to manage when there's a higher level of potassium, nitrogen, or anything in the soil, and just be like, alright, I'm just sitting in a rich pile of nutrition. The orchids will resent that, even though it's something that they can use. They can't sit down in a lot of salt. So we'll have to watch that. Water quality is another one. The quality of our water, some of us use the NWC water. It has a lot of minerals, fluoride, and chlorine. The orchid roots are quite sensitive to that sort of thing. The different types of media too. Most of the media that we use, of course, orchids are not normally grown in the soil, so it's soilless media. These media, coir, bark, the stones, the charcoal, they don't naturally have nutrition. They don't have the essential elements in them naturally, which means that we are left now to apply all of this. So we have to take that into consideration. So the next thing is iron sensitivity, which we'll get into when we start discussing iron as a micronutrient. And then, so now what we're going to do is move on to the first of many, the macronutrients. Anybody recall what the macronutrients are? NPK. Right, so the NPK. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. These ones are considered our macronutrients. So the macronutrients are broken up into the primary nutrients and the secondary nutrients. The primary ones are the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and we went through them a little bit last month when we were looking at the fertilizer labels. So now we're going to look at these, all of these one by one. So let's start with nitrogen. Nitrogen, big N. Nitrogen, big N. That's how you would see it on a fertilizer label. I have some fertilizer labels here. I'm going to pass them on for persons who would want to take a look so that they can know what to.
I know.
You can pass these, pass those around. Alright, so what you do is look at it, big N. Nitrogen is useful for the